Marty. I think we'll get right to our guest, Naseer Aruri, who's quite a frequent visitor to the Arabic Hour. Naseer, the ninth round of talks, I won't call them peace talks, I'll just call them talks, has just been concluded. They were heralded as being definitive and progress was going to be made, and yet nothing has happened. Could you tell us a little bit about what was going on with all this falderall about peace was imminent, about to break out, and then nothing happened?
Well, of course, when the eighth round came to an end, I think that was the time when the Israelis expelled Palestinians, 400 Palestinians, to Lebanon. And the Palestinians took the position that they would not go back until this matter is resolved. But I think that despite the fact that the chairman of the delegation and many people in the Palestinian community were really opposed to going back without having a satisfactory resolution of the expulsion problem, I think that the PLO leadership prevailed on Abd al-Shafi and others in the delegation who were reluctant to go back, to go. I think it was based on perhaps his expectation that he was going to get some sort of concessions once the ninth round gets underway. But I think what happened is that very few of these expectations, if any, were really met.
The newspapers were filled with this. The Israelis brought out Kimche to talk about, that there's going to be real progress. They were really going to talk about land for peace, and there was this sense and feeling that something was going to happen. Now we know the so-called, and I put in quotation mark, concessions. Faisal Husseini from East Jerusalem, and by the way, Arafat in a recent piece in the Middle East International blames Husseini for giving this glowing picture of what was going to happen.
And punished him, I guess, by not allowing him to go back.
Yeah, punished him by not allowing him to go back. And well, let's comment first on Husseini's role. That was one concession. Then we'll talk about the so-called other.
Well, actually, the Husseini's role, it was projected as a concession. That here is Husseini being accepted for the first time as a member of the delegation rather than being a coordinator or a resource person who does not sit in the actual room where they negotiate, but who sits outside because he's from Jerusalem. In fact, I think that the perception in the Palestinian community, especially in the West Bank, was that this was not a concession, that this was an attempt to try to elevate the role of Faisal Husseini, who was seen as being somewhat easy to deal with, and that's what the Israelis actually have said, and to undermine the position of Haidar Abd al-Shafi.
Let's pursue that a little bit more, because Haidar Abd al-Shafi is a man of great integrity, and he really did not want to go back. I mean, he did not feel that there were going to be some real concessions made.
That's correct. I mean, he actually said he made public statements.
Yes, he made a public statement, and yet he is a good person, and he did what the leadership asked him to do.
Yes.
But it is quite clear that this delegation has taken a terrible chance that the Americans, for once, were giving them assurances about Israel, and Israel was making noises that would lead to concessions because they did not get anything. They did not get the expellees back. Mm-hmm. They did not have any kind of commitment to land for peace, no real commitment. They were just simply words. The fact that 30 people were brought back from the old expelled group of 20 and 30 years ago, yes. These were people who were seen to be so-called moderates and pro-PLO. And while that seems to be a contradiction, because the Israelis say we'll never negotiate with the PLO, the use of Hamas in the past has been to undermine the moderation of PLO. Now they're bringing these people back to balance out Hamas. None of these things really work. So the delegation really took a terrible chance, and though they were pressured by Arafat and to some extent by the Syrians, why did most of them go? There were people who didn't go. Why did most of them go? Because they should know better by now.
That's a good question. Why most of them decided to go? I think that we know that the people who decided not to go were those who represent the People's Party, and that is mainly two people on the delegation and one other person who's an advisor to the delegation, so a total of three people. The others were actually waffling on it. I mean, someone like Saeb Ariqat, for example, just a day before the negotiations were convened, he indicated that he was not going to go. And then later they asked him, and he said that he wasn't talking about it yet, and then he went. But others, I would say that they felt that this is what the leadership wanted, and they decided to go along with Tunis.
I mean, it's quite...
undoubtedly, some delegates probably developed some sort of a vested interest in the negotiation process itself. I think that negotiations are really a means to an end, not an end in itself. I don't know if some people beginning to see it as an end in itself.
This is a very serious problem because now you have a population in the West Bank and Gaza who basically have not agreed to continuation of negotiations under the terms set by Israel and the United States. And for those who return to the peace talks, there is a sense and feeling that really they should have understood, they're intelligent enough to understand that such negotiation really means that Israel is talking about having the Palestinians themselves run their own occupation instead of the Israelis. In other words, it's a form of colonial indirect rule.
Yes.
Instead of Israelis beating up Hamas people or anyone else, they'll have Palestinian police do this.
The Palestinians will be able to do it, exactly, yes. That's why they were in a hurry, I think, to talk about training Palestinian police in Jordan and in Egypt, so that they will take the policing functions away from them. But in fact, nothing really has changed, and the delegation members were probably shocked to see that at the end of the ninth round in mid-May, that what was presented by the Israelis during the eighth round was exactly what was being presented in the ninth round. Because the issue here really has been from the very beginning. The issue is whether Israel recognizes itself as an occupant, as an occupier, occupant or not. And Israel has so far refused to do that. It does not really act as an occupier. It looks at Resolution 242, says, okay, we're dealing with 242, but in fact 242 talks about land for peace.
Period.
242 talks about withdrawal. Israel does not see itself as withdrawing. Israel is talking about some sort of a self-government that is going to derive its authority from the Israeli occupation. I think that the source of authority here is very, very important. And we are yet to see an Israeli proposal that says that the source of authority is anything other than the occupation regime. This is the problem that on which they really have been stuck. And this time, when the Palestinians went back, decided to go back, I think that they were enticed by promises and assurances. But shouldn't we think about 18 months ago about the promises and assurances that were made by Mr. Baker to Hanan Ashrawi and to Faisal Husseini? And based on these assurances and promises, the PLO decided to go to Madrid, only to find out that these assurances and promises were set aside. And so we have been trying to convince the Israelis for more than 18 months, and the Americans, in fact, to try to operate within the framework of these assurances. So now what we saw is a set of new assurances. The only thing is that they are more vague than the old assurances, because I think that probably the catalyst, the main thing there was a statement that was made by Christopher that we are going to be an active partner. And that phrase, active partner, was repeated by Arafat and others. I think it must have impressed them.
I think that it is really quite unfortunate after all these years, and I'm sure that the leadership is anxious to see this resolved and would grasp at anything. But surely there must be some people around Arafat who have assessed the situation that, number one, Palestinians are in the weakest possible position, that number two, if the Intifada didn't bring about concessions, the fact that the area has been sealed off, the occupied territories have been sealed off as a result of a few people having been enraged and have participated in killing, that even though the Rabin sealed it off rather than engage in the usual break bones, but of course they've been still carrying out tons of killing and rampage on human rights, that in some ways the fact that these few people who were Israelis who were killed, I think Arafat was thinking, well, maybe now the Israelis have had enough. They're fed up with the occupied territories. How can they think this way?
In reality, the killing actually escalated.
When you had 25 years of occupation, when the Labour Party was in it, it expelled thousands. The Likud actually expelled much fewer. And then Rabin comes back in and expels more, is going ahead with settlements, is determined to hold on to every piece of land that they have. How can the leadership get itself so deluded and repeatedly be treated to American duplicity, especially when Clinton is surrounded by very right-wing Zionists? I mean, I don't know that we can answer that question, but is there an element of delusion here? What's happening?
Well, maybe there is. Maybe there is. I mean, when we find a whole community, not certainly everybody in the community there, but those who represent it, impressed by a phrase such as an active partner. Well, what did this phrase do, in fact, as an active partner? When it became apparent that the deadline is near and that the 9th round was going to come to an end, I think Christopher was afraid that it was not going to yield any results, and therefore he ordered his people in the State Department to present what he called bridging measures for gap bridging. In fact, what they did was not really a proposal to bridge the gap, but rather a proposal that was designed to enable the Israelis and the Palestinians to draw up a joint declaration, a joint statement. Which they did not, because I think the Palestinians found it impossible to accept the American offer, because the American statement talked about self-government with executive and judicial authority, but they excluded legislative authority. That statement said nothing about Jerusalem. That statement said nothing about settlements whatsoever, which are really being built, contrary to what Rabin promised. And also the American statement said that there is some sort of a linkage, and that's a vague thing, really. They said that there's some sort of a linkage between the interim phase and the final phase. So in fact, when we look at this statement, we find that it really comes to nothing. And it does support the Israeli assertion that the Palestinians are not to have any legislative authority. And that, I think, infuriated Arafat. When he, I think, ordered Faisal Hussein to come back, and he began to talk to him and say, well, you guys were making all these optimistic statements. Haidar Abdel-Shafi was making cautious statements, in fact, saying that not much progress was being seen. The credibility of the negotiating team is being affected. because you're speaking at two different levels and nothing was accomplished.
Let's turn for a minute to Israel itself, but I think it's sort of worth noting that at least one commentator pointed out that the American goal at this point in these talks with the Clinton administration is to sort of keep reconvening them and keep people talking just for the sake of talking, and that is considered to be success for the moment until somehow the Clinton regime works out a strategy. But I think their immediate strategy was, of course, to try to divorce Syria from the peace talks. We'll get to Syria in a minute, but I would like to turn a little bit to Israel. It has been said by a number of observers that under the Likud, Shamir talked about autonomy but never had any intention of ever even affecting autonomy, that it was even difficult to sell autonomy to Israelis. That, on the other hand, Rabin is serious about autonomy because he would like to get rid of the burden of actually carrying out the occupation. He would like to have all the benefits of occupation, control the land, feed the settlements, blend the Green Line into Israel, keep all of Jerusalem, and yet turn the burden of policing Palestinian activities to Palestinians themselves. So he would like to do that, and
Yes.
in a sense, the expulsions, which caused a big uproar and caused him eventually to seal the area, has presented that opportunity to him to present the idea of autonomy to the Israeli public. But he has had, quote unquote, a crisis in his government with Meretz and one of the religious parties, Shas. What do you think is happening in Israel now? Do you think that was Rabin's strategy with regard to the occupant, that he would like to see the autonomy in which Israel actually shares power, controls everything, but has none of the responsibilities for?
I think so. I agree. I think that there's no question, while Shamir wanted to drag these things on and on and on for 10 years or for more than 10 years, I think Rabin would really like to arrive at an agreement. And partly because I think he is convinced, and those who are in his framework, in his constituency, are convinced that this is a historic opportunity for the Zionist movement, that the combination of the Gulf War and the end of the Cold War and the fragmentation of the Arab world are just not going to occur again all at the same time, and that this is a golden opportunity for them to have a settlement, the framework of which they had supplied anyway, and the guardian for which is their supporter rather than the umpire. It is the kind of settlement, I think, that he envisages that is going to keep the occupation intact. It's going to transform the Palestinians into agents of the Israeli occupation. They will do the work. And the Palestinians will end up with something like maybe a little bit less than 5% of the land. He is not talking about geographic continuity, about territorial integrity, but rather enclaves. I mean, the occupied territory in the Israeli version is really a collection of enclaves, cantons. The question of sovereignty, I think, will remain in Israeli hands according to his vision, and therefore these are the best circumstances.
Even eventually, that the Palestinians would become so discouraged, and that they would leave, basically, and that's the long term. And so, Labour Party has always had the same strategic goal as the coup.
We want the land without the people, basically.
But their tactics are different, and they appear to be, quote unquote, more acceptable. Well, let me ask you a different question, and perhaps we can comment now a little bit on Syria. I mean, there was a time there where, again, the media was filled with information, quote unquote, about Syria striking a separate deal with Israel, and for many of us, we thought that might be a possibility if Syria was offered a really sweet deal, such as the Golan Heights returned, and even freer hand in Lebanon, and perhaps some say so over the dispensation of the Palestinian question, but at least the Golan Heights. It now has become clear, and to the Syrians with whom I have spoken recently, they have claimed that Hafez al-Assad never intended to have a separate deal with Israel, as did Sadat, that he's not going to pull a Camp David, and they are insistent on that. And more recently, they have again restated that they will not have a settlement without a comprehensive settlement, and they will not allow even southern Lebanon to be discussed, which comes under a different resolution, until the Golan Heights are discussed and the comprehensive solution is sought. So this is in some ways a positive thing for the Palestinians, as well as all the other actors, Arab actors.
Yes, especially at you know.
How do you read Syria? I mean, Syria's played a really peculiar role with regard to Palestinians. On the one hand, they have undermined the PLO, and on the other hand, they have been supportive of certain efforts. What do you think the Syrian game is?
Well, there's no question that Syria wants to recover the Golan Heights. I think that this is really uppermost. This is the most important factor in their strategy. At the same time, I am doubtful really that the Syrians would do a separate deal in the way that Sadat did with Sinai. There are differences, I think, between Egypt and Syria. I think that there's a historical role that Syria played there in the Arab world, that Syria was seen always as being the focus of Arab nationalism, irrespective of the fact that Hafez Assad has not been exactly, an Arab nationalist of the first order. But I think that there are constituencies in Syria that the government of Syria, of Hafez Assad, has to take into account. And these constituencies will not probably go along with something similar to what Sadat did with Israel. The second thing is that I think Syria is really one of the first Arab states to begin to operate on the principle that there is something called security policy, Syrian security policy, and what its requirements are. I think that there is some strategic thinking that goes on, in the policymakers there. And it would not really be something that would serve Israel's security policy to go it alone. And not to insist on having a comprehensive settlement. I think that they would see their security impaired if they were to go a separate way.
Well, let me turn to American foreign policy for a moment, and then return to the Palestinian situation. What is American foreign policy really up to now? Has Clinton got his act together, or is he simply letting Martin Indyk run Mr. Christopher and determine what's happening with regard to the Middle East? Is Clinton so far gone that he is not even interested in it, or if he's interested in it, he just simply takes one position? Is there anything to hope for there? I mean, Georgian is still running around. He's the former ambassador to Syria. He's trying to put a different light on things, but he's not. He certainly isn't any different from the rest of the State Department people that have handled this.
Well, I mean, I think that the record shows that Clinton has gone farther than anyone else in the past in embracing the Israeli cause and just proceeding in tandem with the Israeli strategy. That is very clear, I think, in terms of the appointments he made to the policy-making circles that make Middle East policy. I think it was very clear in his February 1st, 1993 compromise, so-called compromise, over the issue of the expellees. I think it can also be seen in the new position that he has taken on settlements. I mean, there was a time that we all recall that settlements were illegal under Carter. They became an obstacle to peace under Baker and Bush. And now the obstacle to peace has been removed. And the State Department virtually condones, I mean, effectively it condones the building of settlements. And we have seen that really under Clinton. At the same time, Clinton is really disinterested in the Middle East. I think that he's absorbed in domestic issues, and his own Democrats now are giving him a hard time over his priorities and the
certainly the Bosnian issue in terms of foreign policy.
There is the Bosnian issue also that is weighing really heavily on them.
But wouldn't you think, or maybe I'm just being too rational, that given the Bosnian situation, and he has come out in favor of at least assisting the Bosnian Muslims in some fashion, and I think that is in part because they're concerned about Islamic fundamentalism, in quotation marks, all around the area and throughout the world where it's rising up, that they have to prove themselves there, so that he would have at least make some connection that he must deal with this in terms of the Middle East, or does he think that the Israelis can somehow deal with it in Palestine once it's dealt with in Palestine by having the so-called autonomy or whatever, that then it disappears from the Middle East? You know, I mean, if he's making connections at all, and I haven't heard him say anything on this, but I don't know what
connection between Bosnia and the Middle East.
And the Middle East, because obviously, theoretically, the Arabs have been upset about this.
Yes.
Well, let me turn.
Yeah, I mean, the Arabs have been upset about it, but at the same time, they don't really have any leverage there, and he is not taking that into account at all. But I think with regard to the Middle East, he does not seem to be really in a hurry, because he views it as a manageable situation. That there are no forces that are impelling him to take any initiatives that are going to make a radical departure from the slow pace that they are applying to it.
And when they give their attention to anything, it's to the Gulf and Iran.
Yeah, I mean, the Gulf is under control under
Iran,
these leaders.
Iran is on the horizon.
Iran is on the horizon, but at the same time, I think that the constituencies that are urging him to deal with Iran against those who have been talking about Iraq and so on, are not really, it seems that they're not making much of a strong argument for it. And the feeling I have is that Washington really sees the Middle East as being manageable. It's under control.
So basically,
and therefore, why invest more capital in it now?
So the Gulf is under American hegemony.
Exactly.
The rest is too weak to do much of anything.
Right.
And Israel can take care of it in any case. So why bother?
So why bother?
Yeah.
Why bother? In other words, in time, the Arabs will come around. And recent history shows that, I mean, the Palestinians and others who have always said that we are not going to come back and hear our demands, immediately you hear American officials saying they will come around, they will fall in line, give them some time. And in fact, this is what happened. And that is their thinking about it.
Because the concessions have been made over and over again without any headway. This brings me
we
back,
keep saying that the concessions have bottomed out, but it seems that there's no bottom.
There is no bottom,
really. There's no
and
bottom.
the more concessions the Palestinians, especially the Palestinians, give, the less inclined is the administration Israel to give them anything. Let me go back to the Palestinians, because I think this ninth round perhaps represents a greater crisis in the unity of the Palestinian segments, particularly between the leadership in Tunis and the people on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza. I don't know what's happening in the rest of the diaspora, but I assume that there is also some concern there. But particularly if we just take the leadership at this point and the people in the West Bank and Gaza who are under occupation and suffering all kinds of abuses and so forth. Is there going to be a split, or will it be as usual? I mean, there is differences now, but are they going to paper this over, or is this much more serious? And is there a possibility that some of the delegation may even meet with not only rebukes, but even potentially some more violent form of reaction?
Well, I think that the leadership has really been under pressure to perform, and the people in the territories, in the occupied territories, see that it's really overdue, that something should have happened long time ago. And now, when you look at the end of the 9th round, none of the promises that were made have been kept, that the occupied territories are still under siege, that thousands of workers are not able to get to their work, not only in Israel proper, but also in Jerusalem, because, I mean, Jerusalem is the nerve center. I mean, it's an economic, it's a cultural center. People have not been able to go there. It is isolated, and the territory is under siege. And every day the killing is taking place. 2 and 3 Palestinians are being killed. Economic conditions have really deteriorated, and so did health conditions. And something has to happen. So there's got to come. I mean, it's bound. The time is bound to come, and I think it's going to come very soon, when these people are going to say that you really have to show something for this diplomacy, this so-called diplomacy.
What is the role of the PNC at this point, the Palestine National Council? Does it have a role? Can it assert its role and call for a different approach to this problem?
Well, the PNC, as you know, is a legitimizing agency,
yes.
And I think that in the conditions of Palestinians, so physical and legal fragmentation, I guess they see it as a remarkable achievement that they even have a PNC. PNC probably will not convene unless the leadership convenes it. Because it's headed by a man who is loyal to Arafat, and it would really convene upon Arafat's orders. But there is, of course, the Central Council, which acts between the PNC and the Executive Committee. Now, I've read 2 reports this week indicating that the Central Council, in fact, will convene during the first week of June.
That's a smaller
in order
unit
to
of
make
the,
an assessment. The Central
yeah.
Council consists of about 100 and maybe
it's a smaller unit of the
405
PNC, yes.
members of the PNC. But the question with the PNC and the Central Council really is that the PNC met now nearly 19 months ago in Algiers and gave a go-ahead signal to the PLO to proceed to Madrid. But it gave that signal to go. I mean, actually, it gave the green light, I should say, for them to go, based on certain principles, on 6 principles that we don't need to go into the details. But the question is that not one of these 6 principles is really operating in the framework of the negotiations. And so many people think that it is really time for the PNC to meet again and to make a reassessment of these 6 principles. Have they been met or haven't they been met? It doesn't take a great deal of intelligence to come out with the conclusion that none of the 6 principles actually has been met, in fact. But now the question is the leadership going to risk it and have this PNC come back in order to tell them that you really haven't performed? I don't think that they're really in that mood. I think that they will still try to see if they can persuade the Israelis and the Americans to change their mind.
They can.
As if
but, I mean,
there are no objective factors in the world, you see.
I mean, they have no leverage.
Yeah,
I mean, they cannot
the
understand that they have no leverage. And I just can't understand why the leadership would pursue this policy. I assume that at some point, especially after this round, that some form of demand, whether it be public or indirect to Arafat, will come out of the territory.
Well, it's coming from 3 sources now. It's coming from 3 sources. It's coming from the 10 groups that are based in Damascus, the so-called rejectionists. These people have been speaking with one voice. They have been adamantly opposed to the process because it did not really produce anything. I don't think that they really are opposed to negotiations, but they're opposed to the format and to the framework and to the way it has been handled. So that's one. Secondly, you have the religious establishment. You have the Islamists, basically. And we heard them accuse the PLO of treason for having agreed to go back to negotiations even before we knew that the results of these negotiations were zero.
And this is broader than this simply Palestinian Islamicists. It is Jordanians and others.
Exactly, it's an Arab.
It's an Arab,
it's
Islamic,
a pan-Arab Islamicist. And in fact, non-Islamicists, but the Islamicists are the only ones who are really organized
and speak out
in confrontation with the West and with Western supremacy. And so this does really encompass a lot of others who are not Islamicists. And then the third source of opposition in the Palestinian community comes from various sectors in the West Bank and Gaza. So it's really growing, and the leadership is, in my view, going to be pressured to do something.
Well, I think
to do something different from what it's been doing.
They're going to have to somehow restructure, reorganize. Otherwise, they really risk the fragmentation of a united front. I mean, at this point, there has been an umbrella group that has functioned, but it hasn't produced anything.
I guess one of the things that came up also is that when Arafat was talking with Arab leaders and others about going back or not, I think there was a Saudi promise that there will be some funds.
And nothing has come through.
And now the funds did not come through.
Nothing has come through. There was even talk at the talks. The Israelis apparently put down on paper that they recognize the territorial integrity of the West Bank and Gaza. And that made the delegation sort of elated for a while until they then indicated that it doesn't mean territorial jurisdiction. And so the Israelis continue to play with words and play with members of the delegation, unfortunately. Who
I really think after more than 18 months, the Palestinian side has not really developed a good sense of evaluating the terminology and these categories that both the Americans and the Israelis use, like political rights versus national rights, jurisdiction versus territorial integrity.
And I think there's something more also, Naseer. I think that the delegation has, in a sense, forgotten that its constituency is the people in the occupied territories and the rest of the Palestinian people outside of the territories, and has taken as its constituency pleasing the Americans. And I don't want to be too harsh, but I sometimes feel that they relate to what will motivate and please that group after they continue to get assurances that don't come about. So that it's not only the language that they don't understand, and I think that's part of the problem, but it's that combined with the fact that they're relating to a process as the constituency rather than
to constituents who are supposed to be their backbone.
Who are totally against this autonomy business. They know what it means, they understand it, and so there's great concern. A final question is in the recent issue with Middle East International, there was talk that somehow Paris is now seeing an opportunity where Rabin is under attack by Shas and Meretz to step forward and perhaps be the next leader of the Labor Party, and he's putting himself forward as yet another moderate. Paris has never been for a Palestinian state. Paris has always been for the old Labor Party position, which was the Hollande plan, which isn't much different from what is being offered right now. Does that mean anything, or is that just another leader looking to...
I don't think so. I mean, I think that the difference really is different in temperaments, different in language, different in style, but I think that both of them are really committed to the mainstream Zionist line that's associated with the labor movement. Moreover, I think that Paris's time is really gone. I mean, I doubt very much that he's about to start a new career
he certainly
now.
is trying, yeah.
He's trying, yes, but I don't know whether he would really succeed in that way.
Well, we want to thank you for coming. I think we could go on and talk about issues of human rights and so forth, and how that is being used today to try to normalize the occupation, which you have written on extensively. But our time has run out, and we thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Elaine.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks.